morning, students. In the last class, we have started the topic orbit and we have dealt with anatomy of the orbit. So today we will continue with the second session, that is diseases of orbit. In today's class, we will talk about proptosis, orbital cellulitis, preceptal cellulitis, and if time permits, I will complete cavernous sinus thrombosis also. So first we will start with proptosis. What we'll deal with proptosis in the following headings. So what is proptosis? How do you classify proptosis? What is pseudoproptosis and how do you evaluate a case of proptosis? So what do you mean by proptosis? It is abnormal protrusion of the eyeball. It is called proptosis or exophthalmos. Though the term exophthalmos is synonymous with proptosis, it is reserved for prominence of the eye secondary to thyroid disease. So how do you classify proptosis? It is classified into unilateral, bilateral, acute, intermittent and pulsatile proptosis. So what are the causes of each type of proptosis? In unilateral proptosis, the causes are congenital, traumatic, inflammatory, circulatory disturbances, cysts of the orbit, tumors of the orbit, and mucocele of the paranasal sinuses. So congenital causes are dermoid cyst, keratoma, and congenital cystic eyeball. In traumatic causes, we have orbital hemorrhage, aneurysm, emphysema, and intraorbital foreign body. Coming to inflammatory lesions, these are orbital abscess, cellulitis, thrombophlebitis, and pseudotumor. In circulatory disturbances, we have varix and aneurysms. Cysts of the orbit, these are parasitic cysts, hematic cysts, and implantation cysts. Tumors of the orbit are optic nerve glioma, meningioma, cavernous hemangioma, capillary hemangioma, etc. Mucocele of the paranasal sinuses. Coming to bilateral proptosis, these causes are developmental anomalies of the skull like craniofacial dysostosis. For example, oxycephaly where there is tower skull. The other causes are osteopathies, that is osteitis deformans, rickets, etc. can also lead to bilateral proptosis. Coming to inflammatory conditions, these are Nicolaides syndrome and late stage of cavernous sinus thrombosis. The most important cause of bilateral proptosis is endocrine exophthalmos seen in thyrotoxicosis. Coming to tumors, these include symmetrical lymphomas or lymphosarcoma. And the systemic diseases which cause bilateral proptosis are histiocytosis, amyloidosis, xanthomatosis, vaginal granulomatosis, and thyroid disease. Next, coming to acute proptosis. So the term acute indicates it occurs with extreme rapidity or sudden onset. So what are the common causes of acute proptosis? These are orbital emphysema, retained orbital hemorrhage, and fracture of the medial orbital wall and rupture of the ethmoidal mucocele. Next, coming to intermittent proptosis. Intermittent means it appears and disappears on its own. The common causes are periodic orbital edema, orbital varix, recurrent orbital hemorrhages, and highly vascular tumors. Coming to pulsating proptosis. This is caused by pulsatile vascular lesions such as keratico-cavernous fistulas and aneurysms of the ophthalmic artery. Pulsatile proptosis can also occur because of the transmitted cerebral pulsations when there is deficit in the orbital roof. So these include congenital meningocele, meningoencephalocele, neurofibromatosis, and traumatic or operative hiatus. So these are the causes of each of different types of proptosis. So next, with the idea of what is proptosis, we must also know what do we mean by pseudoproptosis. So what is pseudoproptosis? Here there is protrusion of the, it appears that there is protrusion of the globe, but there is actually no forward displacement. So what is the cause of pseudoproptosis? When there is asymmetry of the bony orbits. So one eye appears proptosed when compared to the other eye because of the asymmetry of the bony orbits. And other important cause is ophthalmos. So I think you remember what is ophthalmos and in which condition you see ophthalmos. It is seen in congenital glaucoma. There is enlargement of the globe. So other cause of pseudoproctosis are axial high myopia, retraction of the upper lid, and inophthalmos of the opposite eye. When the other eye is small, it appears that this eye is proptosed. And also when there is paralysis of extraocular muscles and shallow orbits as in craniofacial dysostosis. So after when a patient comes with proptosis, so how do we evaluate the patient of proptosis? So first we must take detailed history of the patient. In history we must include what is the age of onset, what is the nature of the onset, duration, progression, associated systemic symptoms, and also local ocular symptoms. All these must be included in the history. Age of onset is important because certain diseases are more common in certain age group. Like in children, unilateral proptosis, the most common cause is orbital cellulitis. And in adults, the most common cause is thyroid orbitopathy. And in bilateral proptosis, children, most common cause is neuroblastoma and leukemias. Whereas in adults, it is thyroid ophthalmopathy. So age of the onset is important for establishing the diagnosis. Similarly, nature of onset is also important. As I have said, whether it is acute or gradual proptosis, we have dealt with the causes of acute proptosis. Similarly, intermittent proptosis. So, to evaluate the cause of proptosis, nature of onset is important. Duration, progression, associated symptoms must also be inquired in the history. So after taking detailed history, we have to inspect the patient. So what we get from inspection, we have to differentiate between proptosis and pseudoproptosis, whether it is true or false, and also whether the proptosis is unilateral or bilateral. And we must also note the shape of the skull. And we have to observe whether the proptosis is axial or eccentric. So what do you mean by axial proptosis? Here, the eye is pushed directly forwards. This is caused due to lesions present in the central space. That is optic nerve glioma, meningioma, cavernous hemangiomas, etc. These all cause axial proptosis. So this is an image showing axial proptosis where you can see there is forward displacement of the globe. So what do you mean by eccentric or non-axial proptosis? So here, when the lesion is situated elsewhere in the orbit, it pushes the eye in the opposite direction. So this is eccentric proptosis. These are the various images showing eccentric proptosis. In this figure, you can see there is upward displacement of the globe. So what kind of lesions cause upward displacement? When the lesion is present below, it pushes the globe upward. So the lesions in the maxillary sinus or in the floor can cause upward displacement. Similarly, this image it shows downward displacement of the globe. So lesions present above in the roof, that is frontal sinus, meningoencephalocele, all these can cause downward displacement. This image we can see medial displacement of the globe. So medial displacement is caused by laterally placed lesions. So what are present in the lateral part? We have lacrimal gland tumors, dermoid, all these can cause medial displacement of the globe. So in this image it shows lateral displacement of the globe. So medially placed masses. So what we have here, lacrimal sac tumors and ethmoidal mucoceles, all these can produce lateral displacement of the globe. So this is eccentric proptosis or non-axial proptosis. So in inspection, we have to see whether it is true or false proptosis, whether it is unilateral or bilateral, and whether it is axial or eccentric. And also we have to examine for any associated ocular symptoms, ocular signs. So here, this is a picture showing neurofibroma. This is a S-shaped deformity of the upper lid. This is subconjunctival lymphoma. This is called Salmon patch. This is thyroid eye disease. You can see there is congestion of the around the limbus, perilimbal congestion is present. And this is keratoconus fistula. We can see dilated tortuous veins above and severe conjunctival phimosis. So these are associated ocular signs you have to examine. And after inspection, we have to do palpation. So what are important during palpation? We have to do check for retro displacement of the globe. When retro displacement is done, we have to check for compressibility. If there is resistance while you are doing retro displacement, we have to compress the globe posteriorly and feel the thrust. If there is increase in the thrust or increased resistance while displacing the globe posteriorly, it indicates that the tumor is solid tumor. If there is compressibility of the globe, it indicates that the tumor is soft tumor like orbital varix or any vascular pathologies. And other important things are whether it is painful or painless. Tenderness is present or not must also be evaluated. And thrill. Thrill is palpable in keratoconus fistulas and AV malformations. We must also palpate the orbital rims so that if we have to observe for any fracture. So discontinuity of the orbital wall must be examined during palpation. All the superior, inferior orbital margins, medial and lateral orbital margins must be examined for any fracture or dehiscence of the orbital wall. So that completes palpation. So next we will have auscultation. So when there is thrill present during palpation, in such cases we have to do auscultation with the help of bell of the stethoscope on the temporal aspect of the, or lateral aspect of the globe. We can hear a bruit. This indicates keratoconus fistulas. And other important findings we have to check in a case of proptosis is transillumination. In anterior orbital masses, transillumination will be positive. And we have also to check for any lymphadenopathy in the preauricular and cervical neck nodes. Coming to ocular examination, we have to check the visual acuity. So when is visual acuity decreased due to orbital lesions? It is either decreased because of changes in the refractive error caused by pressure of the orbital mass on the globe. Because of the pressure of the mass on the globe, there is change in the contour of the eyeball. So it leads to refractive error variation. So because of refractive errors, there is decrease in the visual acuity. And other causes of decrease in the visual acuity are optic nerve compression. Because of the optic nerve compression, there is optic neuropathy and decrease in the vision. Other causes, because of the proptosis, there is exposure of the cornea and drying leading to exposure keratopathy. So these three are the main causes of reduced visual acuity in a case of proptosis. After vision, we have to check for pupillary reactions. Presence of a Marcus gun pupil. So what is Marcus gun pupil? It is also known as relative afferent pupillary defect. It is covered in the neuroophthalmic topic. So I hope you all remember about RAPD. It indicates that there is optic nerve compression. So after pupillary examination, we have to do fundoscopy. In fundoscopy, we see, so this is a picture of the fundus. Here you can see the disc margins are blurred and there is venous engorgement. So this is a case of disc edema. In the late stages, there is optic atrophy is present. And this is opticociliary shunts and these are toroidal folds. Seen in case of optic nerve meningioma when it causes compression and also when it pushes the globe from posteriorly, there is occurrence of toroidal folds. And other ocular features we must note are ocular motility. There is restriction of the ocular movements in cases like thyroid ophthalmopathy. And in cases where there is neurological deficit caused due to any orbital text lesions also, there is paralytic squint. So there is decrease in the ocular motility. So how do you differentiate between restrictive myopathy and paralytic squint? This is differentiated by force reduction test. The patient is asked to lie in a supine position, and with the help of forceps, we move the muscle in the direction of the in which there is restriction of the movement. So if there is restriction of the movement, then we cannot move the muscle in the direction of which there is uh, deficit of the movement. For example, if the patient is not able to move the eye medially, so we hold the medial rectus and we move it medially. If we feel resistance, it indicates it is restrictive pathology. If it is a neurological lesion, then we can easily move the eyeball medially. So that is force reduction test. Next is tonometry. IOP is generally raised in thyroid eye disease, especially in the upward gaze. This is differential IOP test. And next, we have to assess how much proptosis is present. So how do we assess the amount of proptosis? By measuring the distance between the lateral canthus and corneal apex. So this measurement method of recording the distance between lateral canthus and the apex of the cornea is called exophthalmometry. There are various methods of recording this exophthalmometry. We have Hertel's, Lutz and Mach exophthalmometry. So what is the normal value? Normal distance between lateral canthus and corneal apex is about 10 to 21 mm. If it is more than 21 mm, it suggests a proptosis. That is for a case of unilateral proptosis. So how we say, when there is difference of more than 2 mm between both the eyes, it indicates proptosis. So out of Hertel's, Lutz and Mach exophthalmometry, Hertel's is the most widely used because we can measure both eyes simultaneously. So this is Hertel's exophthalmometry. And this is Worm's eye view. Here we ask the patient to bend the head backwards and we stand in front of the patient and look for proptosis. Here you can see the left eye is proptosed. This is in a case of minimal proptosis. This is called Knapp-Ziegler method, where we stand behind the patient and we slightly bend the head backward and observe the difference in the position of the eyes. So this appears more proptosed when compared to this. This is called Knapp-Ziegler's method. So this is Lutz exophthalmometer. Here a simple plastic rule is cut along the one edge so that it fits in exactly into the lateral canthus and the distance between the canthus and corneal apex is taken. We can also measure the amount of proptosis with the help of a plastic rule also. So this is Hertel's exophthalmometer. After inspection, palpation, auscultation and ocular features, then we proceed with how we evaluate by investigative procedures. So what investigations we do? Complete hemogram must be done to rule out any infections. And thyroid function test when we suspect thyrotoxic exophthalmos. Cassinese test for sarcoidosis, stool examination when we suspect any parasitic cyst, and urine analysis must also be done. General systemic examination should be done for when we suspect diseases such as amyloidosis, histiocytosis and vaginous granulomatosis. After lab investigation, we proceed to radiological investigations. So what are the radiological investigations we have? We have both non-invasive and invasive. In non-invasive, we have plain X-rays, computerized tomography scan, computed tomography scanning, ultrasonography and MRI. In invasive procedures, we have orbital venography, carotid angiography and radioisotope studies. So X-rays are initially the most commonly used modality, but with the advent of CT scan, the use of X-rays is decreased. We have various techniques of approaches. Waters view, Caldwell view, lateral view and Rees view are the four approach of taking X-rays, and during X-rays we have to observe for the size of the orbit and the density of the bone in the orbital margins and also the change in the optic canal and superior orbital fissure. So all these four features must be observed in the X-rays. In CT scan, why is CT scan compared superior to X-rays is that along with the orbit we can also examine the optic nerve, globe and optic nerve, extraocular muscles. All these can also be visualized in a three-dimensional way with the help of contrast enhancement also. So CT is considered more superior to X-rays. So these are the pictures showing abnormal in a case of proptosis. So this is optic nerve glioma. You can see hyperdense lesion present surrounding the optic nerve. And this is a case of optic nerve sheath meningioma. Here you can see there is increased hyperdense lesion surrounding the optic nerve sheath. And this is a case of thyroid ophthalmopathy where we see thickening of the extraocular muscles. This is an important feature in thyroid ophthalmopathy. And this is a CT picture showing bilateral retinoblastoma. So in retinoblastoma, if you remember, the important thing is intraorbital calcification. So this is bilateral retinoblastoma. Next, coming to MRI. MRI is, though it is considered superior to CT scan, for orbital lesions, CT is superior when compared to MRI in orbital lesions, because bony tissues lesions can be easily evaluated by CT when compared to MRI. MRI is mostly used for soft tissue evaluation. So these are pictures showing choroidal melanoma. Here you can see there is enhancement inside the eyeball and also posteriorly. There is extension to the optic nerve. This is a picture showing cavernous hemangioma. Next, coming to histopathological studies. Histopathological studies, we have FNAC, incisional biopsy, and excisional biopsy. FNAC, it is done under direct vision in an obvious mass. CT or ultrasound guided is observed or advised in retrobulbar mass. When we do incisional biopsy, it is generally not preferred because the specimen size must be about 9 to 10 mm. So it is centimeters. So it is very difficult to incise such a big specimen. So generally not preferred, and we prefer excisional biopsy more commonly when the tumor is circumscribed or encapsulated. Histopathological studies are generally, evaluation of proptosis is not complete without doing histopathological study. It aids as a confirmatory test for the diagnosis. So that is about proptosis. So we have dealt with what is proptosis, how do you classify a case of proptosis into unilateral, bilateral, acute, intermittent, and pulsatile. And next, what is pseudoproptosis? Next, how to evaluate a case of proptosis. In evaluation, we have inspection, history, inspection, palpation, auscultation, and ocular examination, visual acuity, pupillary reactions, fundus examination, ocular movements, and IOP. Coming to investigations, we have radiological, that is invasive and non-invasive. In non-invasive, we have CT, MRI, ultrasonography, and X-rays. In invasive, we have orbital venography and carotid angiography. So these are not generally preferred. Histopathological studies, we have FNAC, incisional biopsy, and excisional biopsy. So that completes about proptosis. So with the basic knowledge of proptosis, now we'll deal with orbital inflammations and infections. So how do you classify orbital infections and inflammations? So first we'll classify orbital infections. These can be classified into acute and chronic. In acute, the causes are preceptal cellulitis, orbital cellulitis, orbital thrombophlebitis, orbital periostitis, and cavernous sinus thrombosis. In chronic, we have tuberculosis, syphilis, mucormycosis, actinomycosis, and parasitic infections. Coming to non-infective orbital inflammations, we have isolated orbital inflammations, that is either diffuse and focal. So what are the causes of diffuse orbital inflammations? These are idiopathic orbital inflammatory disease and idiopathic sclerosing inflammation of the orbit. Coming to focal causes of orbital inflammations, that is myositis, dacroiditis, and Tolosa-Hunt syndrome. Coming to systemic. Systemic, it is thyroid eye disease, vaginous granulomatosis, and sarcoidosis. So that is about classification of infections and inflammations. So today we will deal about orbital infections. So first, to start with, we will deal about orbital cellulitis. So what do we mean by orbital cellulitis? It is inflammation of the eye tissue behind the orbital septum. When it affects the rear of the eye, it is known as retroorbital cellulitis. It refers to acute spread of infection into the eye from either the adjacent sinuses or through the blood. So what is the etiology of orbital cellulitis? There are three ways of spread. The most common causes from extension from the neighboring structures like paranasal sinuses, tooth, face, lids, intracranial cavities, and intraorbital structures. Coming to exogenous infection. This is caused due to penetrating injuries, retained intraocular foreign bodies, and surgeries or operations like evisceration, enucleation, orbitotomy, and dacrocystectomy. Coming to the third mode of infection, that is endogenous infection, caused due to spread of infection from elsewhere in the body, like puerperal sepsis, thrombophlebitis of the leg, septicemia, and rarely metastasis from the carcinoma of the breast. The predisposing factors are diabetes and immunocompromised states. Coming to agents causing orbital cellulitis. Most commonly, bacterial infections are common. In children, Staph aureus, Streptococcus pneumoniae, and anaerobes are common. In adults, Staph, Strep, E. coli, and mixed flora is common. In diabetics and immunocompromised individuals, fungal infections are common. The most common fungi causing orbital cellulitis is Aspergillus and Mucormycosis. Coming to parasitic infections are also reported due to Echinococcus, Taenia solium, Trichinella spiralis, and Toxoplasma gondii. So, after completing the causes and mode of spread, we'll deal with the pathology of orbital cellulitis. Like elsewhere in the body, orbital cellulitis also there is suppurative inflammation. But what is specific of orbital cellulitis is that here there is a rapid spread of infection. Why? Because there is absence of lymphatics, and also there is rapid spread and extensive necrosis caused due to thrombophlebitis of the surrounding structures, and also orbit is a tight compartment. So there is a raised intraorbital pressure causing more rapid worsening of the symptoms and increase in the spread of the disease. Coming to symptoms. So cellulitis means infection and inflammation. So the most important symptom is pain. Along with the pain, patient has general symptoms like fever, headache, malaise, nausea, vomiting, and prostration. And patient has globe displacement. In moderate and advanced cases, the patient will complain of vision loss and diplopia. Coming to signs, means which we examine. There is lid edema. There is, along with the swelling of the lids, there is redness of the eyelids, and it is woody hardness is present. Conjunctival chemosis is present. Proptosis, it is of variable. It can be either minimal or it can be marked depending upon the amount of cellulitis. There is restriction of ocular motility either because of ophthalmoplegia, and there is raised IOP. Visual impairment is also present because of compressive optic neuropathy and also because of central retinal artery occlusion. Pupil, there can be RAPD because of restriction, compression of the optic nerve by raised intraorbital pressure. And in fundus, changes can be seen in the late stages like optic nerve edema, optic disc edema, and in the late stages we have optic atrophy. So these are the signs we see in orbital cellulitis. So this is a image showing orbital cellulitis. So as mentioned, lids, that is woody hardness of the lids, tense lids are present and lid edema with redness is present. Conjunctival chemosis here along with pus is present. So this is also another picture showing orbital cellulitis. Coming to complications, we have orbital complications and ocular complications. So what are the orbital complications? There can be occurrence of subperiosteal abscess, orbital abscess, temporal or parotid abscess. So what do you mean by subperiosteal abscess? Here there is collection of pus between bony orbital wall and periosteum. Medial orbital wall is most commonly inward. So when do we suspect subperiosteal abscess? Generally, orbital cellulitis, it causes axial proptosis. But here, when there is subperiosteal abscess, there is eccentric proptosis. Most commonly, it is present along the medial wall. So the patient presents with lateral displacement of the globe. So when it is eccentric proptosis is present in the patient with orbital cellulitis, we have to suspect subperiosteal abscess. So how do you confirm it? By taking a CT scan. Coming to orbital abscess, here there is collection of pus within the orbital soft tissue. So what are the signs of orbital abscess? There is severe proptosis with marked chemosis and complete ophthalmoplegia. And there is pus pointing below the conjunctiva. So how do we confirm a case of orbital abscess? By taking a CT scan. So this is a picture showing orbital abscess. You can see there is a pus discharging out from the sinus. So other complications are temporal or parotid abscess. Intracranial complications can also occur when the infection spreads into the cavernous sinus, leading to cavernous sinus thrombosis, meningitis and brain abscess. Ocular complications, and because of the proptosis, it can lead to exposure of the cornea and corneal exposure keratopathy. And compression of the optic nerve, it can lead to optic neuropathy. So these are the ocular complications. So how do we proceed with the case of orbital cellulitis? So we have to investigate first. How do you manage it? By doing bacterial cultures. So bacterial infection is most common. So we do bacterial cultures, complete hemogram and X-ray PNS so that we can identify what is the root of infection. Orbital ultrasonography to identify any orbital abscess and the posterior extent. CT and MRA. So when a CT and MRA indicated to differentiate between orbital cellulitis and preseptal cellulitis, and also as already mentioned for diagnosing subperiosteal abscess and orbital abscess to identify whether there is any intracranial extension, and from when and to where to drain an orbital abscess. So for all these cases we have to do a CT scan. Next, how do you treat a case of orbital cellulitis? Now, the mainstay of treatment is antibiotics. So, what antibiotics are preferred? Generally, penicillinase resistant antibiotic, that is oxacillin, is prescribed for staph aureus. For Haemophilus influenza, we have to give clavulanic acid along with this antibiotic. And in patients where oxacillin is not available, then we can also give cefotaxime, chloramphenicol or ciprofloxacin can also be given. And we have to give anti-inflammatory drugs or analgesics to relieve the pain. Nasal decongestants are also advised. And when do we surgically intervene? Surgical intervention is indicated when we suspect the orbital abscess along with a foreign body, or when there is subperiosteal abscess, and if there is progression of the visual loss and extraocular motility defects are present, or when there is worsening of the proptosis, non-reduction in the size of abscess on CT within 48 to 72 hours of antibiotic therapy. So in all these 5 cases, we have to intervene surgically. So what are them? When we suspect orbital abscess, when there is worsening of the proptosis, visual loss is progressing, and there is extraocular motility defect. And with antibiotics, there is no reduction in the size of the abscess even after 2 to 3 days of treatment of antibiotics. So in all these cases, we have to surgically intervene. So how do we surgically proceed? When there is abscess, we can drain directly at the site of the highest pus point. So free incision into the abscess can also be done. In case of subperiosteal abscess, we can give a curved incision along the medial aspect of the upper medial aspect of the orbit. Generally, we have to drain both the orbit as well as the infected paranasal sinuses. When brain abscess is present, we have to do craniotomy. And to relieve the intraorbital pressure, we can do either cantholysis or canthotomy. So these are the surgical procedures we perform for the case of orbital cellulitis. So that is about orbital cellulitis. So what is orbital cellulitis? It is infection of the orbital tissues behind the orbital septum. So that is important. And what are the modes of infection? Exogenous, endogenous, and from surrounding structures. What are the main symptoms and signs? How do you investigate a case of orbital cellulitis, and what is the treatment of orbital cellulitis? So that is about orbital cellulitis. It is a short note for you, generally given. Next is preseptal cellulitis. So preseptal cellulitis means inflammation of the cellular tissue anterior to the orbital septum. So all the features that are similar, like swelling of the lids, erythema, pain, everything is present, but the globe is not involved. So what we don't see is there is no conjunctival chemosis, there is no proptosis, and extraocular movements are normal. Visual function is also normal in a case of preseptal cellulitis. So that is the differentiating feature between orbital cellulitis and preseptal cellulitis. So how do we treat a case of preseptal cellulitis? We have to give oral antibiotics like amoxicillin, TID for about 10 to 15 days we have to give, and anti-inflammatory agents for reducing the pain and swelling. Resolution is generally quick and complete in a case of preseptal cellulitis, whereas in orbital cellulitis, it can lead to cavernous sinus thrombosis or other subperiosteal abscess, and complications can occur with orbital cellulitis. So when preseptal cellulitis, so why is it is important? It is important because this preseptal cellulitis can spread into the orbit behind the orbital septum and can lead into orbital cellulitis. So why? Because the veins here, they are valveless and they can easily drain the infection from anterior to orbital septum to posterior orbital septum. So preseptal cellulitis can lead to orbital cellulitis. So we have to identify and treat preseptal cellulitis at the earliest. Next, coming to cavernous sinus thrombosis. So what is this cavernous sinus first? Cavernous sinus is a 2 centimeter long, 1 centimeter wide sinus which is situated in the middle cranial fossa, present along the body of the sphenoid. So it is a 2 centimeter long and 1 centimeter wide sinus tissue. Anteriorly, it has the superior orbital fissure. So this is superior orbital fissure. Posteriorly, we have the petrous temporal bone. and floor is formed by endosteal dura, and the roof is formed by meningeal dura. So this is cavernous sinus. So what are the structures passing through the cavernous sinus and present in the lateral wall of the cavernous sinus? This is important because in cavernous sinus thrombosis, what are the lesions produced? Whatever the lesions produced or signs which are present is because of involvement of these structures. So this is important to know. So the structures passing through the cavernous sinus are sixth nerve and internal carotid artery. So what are the structures present in the lateral wall? We have 3, 4, V1 and V2. Third nerve, that is oculomotor nerve. Fourth nerve, trochlear nerve. V1 means ophthalmic division of the trigeminal nerve. V2 is maxillary division of the trigeminal nerve. So these are the structures present in the lateral wall, and these are the structures passing through the cavernous sinus. Next, coming to tributaries of the cavernous sinus. So what drains into the cavernous sinus and what drains away from the cavernous sinus? So superior ophthalmic vein and inferior ophthalmic vein, they drain into cavernous sinus. So any infection from the orbit as well as the face can gain access into the cavernous sinus easily. So like erysipelas, even stye or furuncles can also lead to cavernous sinus thrombosis in immunocompromised and diabetic individuals. Similarly, what drains away from the cavernous sinus is superior petrosal sinus and inferior petrosal sinus. So here we can see that labyrinthine veins, they drain from the drain into the inferior petrosal sinus. So infection from the labyrinths, so in the ear, can also spread into cavernous sinus thrombosis. And here you can see mastoid emissary veins. These drain into the lateral sinus, which is drained from the cavernous sinus. So infection from the mastoid air cells can also lead to cavernous sinus thrombosis. And one cavernous sinus on one side is connected to the cavernous sinus on other side with the help of intercavernous sinus communications. So infection from one cavernous sinus can lead to infection of the other cavernous sinus. So initially to present it, cavernous sinus thrombosis is unilateral, but in the late stages it becomes bilateral. So with this, with the idea of location of the cavernous sinus, what are the structures passing through and present in the lateral wall, and what are the tributaries of cavernous sinus, we have to deal with what are the clinical features of cavernous sinus thrombosis. It is characterized by multiple cranial neuropathies. So as I already said, cranial nerves are present in the lateral wall and also in the wall. So it leads to cranial neuropathies. General features of infection like fever, rigor, malaise, and frontal and periorbital pain are present. Edema of the eyelids and chemosis of the conjunctiva is present, and there is unilateral exophthalmos and tender eyeball initially, and later it becomes bilateral. Coming to oculomotor features, external ophthalmoplegia because of involvement of 3, 4 and 6th. Initially there is 6th nerve involvement because it is present within the cavernous sinus. Later 3rd and 4th cranial nerves are involved. So because of involvement of 3rd nerve, we have ptosis along with dilated pupil and loss of accommodation reflex. And involvement of 5th cranial nerve leads to corneal anesthesia, and anesthesia along the distribution of the maxillary and ophthalmic division of trigeminal nerve. So this is a picture showing cavernous sinus thrombosis. It is a case of bilateral proptosis. You see marked conjunctival chemosis and dilated pupil you can see here. So how do you investigate the case of cavernous sinus thrombosis? So we have to do CT scan to identify the thrombosis in the cavernous sinus, and also optic nerve involvement can also be seen here. MR venography is the investigation of choice. Blood culture should also be done. Complications, it can lead to meningitis and Pulmonary infarction. Pulmonary infarction is the cause of death. Coming to treatment of cavernous sinus thrombosis, we have to give antibiotics, which is the mainstay of treatment. IV broad spectrum antibiotics should be prescribed. Analgesics for relief of the pain should be given. Anticoagulants, the role of anticoagulants is controversial. Whether to prescribe or not is still under query. So that is about cavernous sinus thrombosis. So infection of the cavernous sinus leading to septic thrombosis of the cavernous sinus is called cavernous sinus thrombosis. Clinical features and from where the infection can occur, tributaries, all this must be known. Cavernous sinus thrombosis is also a short note for you. So today we have dealt with proptosis, orbital cellulitis, preseptal cellulitis and cavernous sinus thrombosis. In the next class, I will deal with thyroid ophthalmopathy, blowout fracture and small knot on orbital tumors and idiopathic pseudotumor, idiopathic orbital inflammatory disease. With that, we will complete orbit in the next class. So if you have any doubts, you can ask. So still, do you have any doubts regarding the syllabus of, for next week? Are you preparing well? So if you have no doubts in today's class, then I'll ask questions from the previous class. Anatomy of the orbit, I'll ask questions if you don't have any doubts in today's class. So shall I? Okay. No one is ready to take the questions. Ma'am, it is being tough to read all questions in all chapters. You are not attending the classes also, you are staying at the home now. What is it difficult to read? There are only some chapters included for the second internal exam. That is also difficult for you and you are not. Can we do arm compression? Yes, we can do arm compression for orbital cellulitis. We can do arm compression. Okay. Do you want me to answer privately? Okay, so I'll ask questions from anatomy of the orbit. What is the shape of orbit? Pyramidal, okay. Quadratic truncated pyramids is the answer, okay. What are the structures? Quadrangular truncated pyramid is the answer. What are the structures forming the medial orbital wall? Lacrimal apparatus, you should not say apparatus, lacrimal bone is correct. There are 4 bones in the medial orbital wall. MES from anterior to posterior. Yes, MES. What is M? What is L? What is E? And what is S? Maxilla, frontal process of maxilla. lacrimal, MLES, lacrimal, ethmoid. What is S? Body of the sphenoid. Okay. What else should I ask? What is suspensory ligament of Lockwood? What is okay. Fascia bulbi, where? What is the other name for fascia bulbi? Tenon's capsule, yes. So what is suspensory ligament of Lockwood? In which part of the orbit it is present? Inferiorly, Tenon's capsule is thickened to form suspensory ligament of the Lockwood in which the globe is suspended. Okay. So what are the four spaces of orbit? There is a power cut here. I think the computer won't last long. Okay, what are the four spaces of orbit? Four surgical spaces of the orbit. Okay. Okay, subperiosteal. Next, peripheral, central, subtenons. Okay. Where is the retrobulbar injection given? In which space do we give retrobulbar injection? In which surgical space is retrobulbar anesthesia given? Okay, central. So I think a good number of students are answering to my questions. It means that you are preparing well for the internal exam. Hope you read well and write your exam properly. So, okay, we'll meet in tomorrow's class for thyroid, ophthalmopathy, and remaining small topics of the orbit. I know that I was fast in today's class because I have to complete orbit in 3 classes so that you will read from Monday. You won't be coming to the class on Monday, so I was just a bit fast today. But I hope everyone understood today's class. So, okay. So, meet you all tomorrow. Thank you.